There is something deeply, fundamentally wrong about being alone in a moving car at 2 in the morning with a stranger you have never met, and yet, every single night, millions of people do exactly that without a second thought. Welcome back, everyone. If you are watching this right now, chances are the room around you is quiet. Maybe the lights are low. Maybe you have already pulled your blanket up a little higher than you normally would, just because something in the back of your mind told you to. That instinct? Trust it tonight, because what I am about to share with you is going to make the familiar feel foreign, and the ordinary feel deeply, deeply unsettling. Before we begin, I want you to get comfortable. Seriously. Adjust your pillow. Settle in. Turn the brightness down on your screen just a little, because the stories I have for you tonight are the kind that deserve to be heard in near darkness, with nothing but the soft glow of your screen and the sound of my voice to keep you company. These are the stories that Uber drivers do not post on social media. These are the stories they whisper to their friends over beers or type out in anonymous forums at 3 in the morning because they cannot sleep anymore and they need someone, anyone, to believe them. Here is something that might surprise you. Studies on rideshare safety have revealed that drivers are far more likely to feel unsafe on the job than passengers ever realize. These are people who spend 8, 10, 12 hours alone in a car, picking up strangers in the dark, driving through neighborhoods they do not know, trusting that the person in their back seat is exactly who their app says they are. Most of the time, it is fine. Most of the time, nothing happens. But most of the time is not all of the time. And in the spaces between the normal rides and the uneventful evenings, some drivers have experienced things that changed them permanently. Things that have made them check their mirrors differently. Things that made some of them quit driving altogether. Tonight, I have 5 of those stories. If this is your first time here, I am so glad you found this channel, and I would love it if you hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss a new story. We put out new content regularly, and if you tap the notification bell, you will always be the first to know when something new drops. If you have been here before, then you already know what kind of night we are about to have. Go ahead and give this video a like. It truly does help more people find these stories. And honestly, these stories deserve to be heard. Now then, let us begin. Tonight's 5 stories come from real Uber drivers across the country. Some of them no longer drive. One of them, I am fairly certain, no longer even uses the app as a passenger. Each story is different. Each one builds on a different kind of dread. But they all share one thing in common: the moment when the driver realized that something about their passenger was not right, not quite human, not quite safe, not quite real. By the end of tonight, you are going to think twice before you get in that back seat. And if you drive for a rideshare company yourself, you might find yourself glancing at your mirror a little more often than you used to. Stay with me. The first story starts right now. Story 1 comes from a driver in Portland, Oregon, a woman named Dana who spent 2 years driving late-night rides to pay for nursing school. She thought she had seen everything the night could throw at her. She was wrong. One pickup near the waterfront changed her understanding of what it means to feel truly watched. Story 2 involves a driver named Marcus, a retired Army veteran from outside of Nashville who drove nights to stay busy after leaving the service. One winter evening, he picked up a man from a rural gas station on the edge of nowhere, a man who seemed to know things about Marcus that he had never told anyone. By the time Marcus arrived at the drop-off address, there was no house there. There never had been. Story 3 comes from a young driver named Priya in Chicago, who was 3 months into her first year driving when she accepted a late-night ride request from a woman named Claire. Claire seemed perfectly normal at first, but Priya began to notice that Claire's reflection in the rearview mirror was not always doing what Claire herself was doing. And then, for one horrible moment, there was no reflection at all. Story 4 is from a driver named Tom in Albuquerque, New Mexico, who agreed to do an unusually long rural route on a Tuesday night for the surge pricing bonus. His passenger was quiet, polite, and kept their face turned toward the window the entire time. When Tom finally arrived at the destination, a remote stretch of desert highway, the passenger asked him a question that has never left him. Not once. Not for a single day since. Story 5 is the one that keeps me up at night the most. It comes from a man named Garrett, who drove in Seattle. He picked up 2 passengers, a man and a woman, who were quiet and polite the whole ride. He dropped them off. He drove away. 3 days later, police knocked on Garrett's door. The couple he had driven had been reported missing since the night before their ride with him. The night that, according to every record that exists, they were never picked up at all. 5 stories, 5 drivers, 5 nights that never really ended. Let us start with Dana. Let's begin our first story and step into a place where sleep and fear meet. The woman by the water? Dana Reyes was 26 years old when this happened, and she will be the first to tell you that she was not the kind of person who scared easily. She had grown up in East Portland, the oldest of 4 kids, the one who checked under beds and in closets for her younger siblings, the one who stayed calm during emergencies while everyone else fell apart. She had held a part-time job since she was 15. She had taken 2 buses and a train every day through high school, late into the evening, through neighborhoods that most people her age were warned to avoid. Fear, for Dana, was something other people had time for. She had been driving for Uber for almost 2 years by the time this particular night came along. She had done the math. 4 nights a week, 6 to 8 hours a shift. She could pull in enough to cover her nursing school tuition without taking on more student loans than she could handle. She had a system. She knew which parts of the city tended to produce good tips and which ones tended to produce headaches. She knew which hours were busy and which ones were dead. She knew how to read a passenger in the first 30 seconds of a ride, not to be judgmental, just to calibrate, to know whether to make conversation or let the silence sit. 2 years of driving had given her a sense for people. She trusted that sense completely. She drove a 2018 Honda Accord Silver, clean, always smelling faintly of the lavender air freshener she kept clipped to her vent. She kept a small cooler in the back with water bottles for passengers and a phone mount on the dash so she could watch the GPS without looking away from the road. She had a playlist she called her Night Drive Mix that she played at low volume. Nothing with lyrics, just ambient electronic music that she found kept her awake and alert without making her feel wired. On the night in question, it was a Thursday in late October. The weather had turned, the way Portland weather tends to in October, not dramatically, not with a clear moment you could point to, but gradually and completely, until one evening you look outside and realize that summer has been gone for weeks, and you somehow did not notice. The air smelled like wet leaves and distant smoke, probably someone's fireplace a few blocks over. The streets near the waterfront were quiet in the way they get after about 1 in the morning, when the bars are still technically open but the energy has shifted, when the people still out are either heading home or have no home to head to. Dana had just finished a 40-minute ride out to the east side and was heading back toward the river, hoping to catch a couple more runs before she called it for the night, when the ping came through. The pickup location was listed as Waterfront Park, specifically the area near the Hawthorne Bridge, down by the riverbank where the walking path ran close to the water. It was a normal enough pickup location for a Friday or Saturday night when people stumbled out of nearby bars wanting a ride home. On a Thursday at 1:15 in the morning, it was a little unusual, but not alarming. Dana accepted the ride and followed the GPS down to the waterfront. She found the parking area, pulled in, and put the car in park. She looked at the pickup pin on her app. She was right on top of it. She looked out the windshield at the path along the river. There was a woman standing at the edge of the walking path, right at the point where the pavement gave way to the grass slope leading down to the water. She was facing away from Dana, looking out at the river. She wore a long, dark coat, navy blue or black, hard to tell in the amber glow of the path lighting. Her hair was dark and pulled back. She was standing very still. Dana rolled down her window and called out the passenger's name. "Sarah?" The woman turned. She walked toward the car slowly, her footsteps quiet on the wet pavement. She opened the back door and got in, bringing with her a faint smell of cold air and river water. She settled into the seat. She looked straight ahead. "Hi," she said. Her voice was soft. Even. Unremarkable. "Hey," Dana said, checking the app. The destination loaded. An address in the Northwest District, about 12 minutes away. Dana pulled out of the parking area and headed for the road. "Kind of a cold night to be out by the water," Dana offered, keeping her voice light and conversational the way she always did, when a passenger seemed like they might want to talk. There was a pause. Not a long one, maybe 3 seconds, but slightly longer than a normal response pause. "I like the water at night," Sarah said. "It is quieter then." Dana nodded. Made sense. She turned left onto Naito Parkway and settled into the drive. The ambient music hummed quietly. The streetlights passed overhead in steady rhythm. In the rearview mirror, Dana could see her passenger. Sarah was looking out the window. Her face was calm, expressionless really, but in a neutral way, the way people look when their mind is elsewhere. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, though it was hard to tell in the dim light of the car. Her skin was pale. Her hands were folded in her lap. Perfectly ordinary. Perfectly unremarkable. Everything was fine. For the first 4 minutes, everything was completely fine. The first thing Dana noticed was the temperature. She had her climate control set to 68 degrees, which was where she kept it on chilly nights, warm enough to be comfortable for passengers, not so warm that it made anyone drowsy. The Accord's heating system was reliable. She never had issues with it. But somewhere around the 3rd or 4th minute of the drive, Dana noticed that she could see her breath, just faintly, just for a moment. A small, thin cloud of vapor when she exhaled. She glanced at the temperature display on her dashboard. It still read 68. She adjusted the heat up to 72, thinking maybe the system was running behind. Maybe the outside cold had gotten into the car more than she realized when Sarah got in. She focused on the road. She exhaled again a minute later. Her breath was still visible. That was strange. Not impossible, but strange. The temperature gauge still read normal. She could feel the warm air coming from the vents, but something in the car felt colder than it should. Dana was practical. She filed it away as a weird HVAC thing and kept driving. The second thing she noticed was the silence. Not the normal kind of late-night quiet that settled naturally into a ride when a passenger was not in the mood to talk. This was a different quality of silence, dense, somehow, and slightly pressurized, the way silence feels in a room where something has just happened. Dana put on her night drive playlist, which she always kept running softly in the background. She reached for the volume and realized it was already on. The music was playing. She just could not quite hear it. Or rather, she could hear it, but it seemed farther away than it should have been, muffled, as if the inside of the car had changed in some subtle way she could not identify. She turned the volume up 2 notches. The music was there, but it still felt distant, like hearing a song through a wall. Dana glanced in the rearview mirror. Sarah was still looking out the window. Her hands were still folded in her lap. She had not moved at all in the time since she got in. Not a shift of weight, not a turn of the head. She was absolutely still, in a way that people generally are not still, because people fidget, people breathe visibly, people adjust, people exist in a constant state of small and unconscious motion. Sarah was not moving at all. Dana watched her in the mirror for about 5 seconds, while keeping her eyes on the road. She told herself later that she was not sure the passenger was breathing, but then again, it was dark in the back of the car, and Dana was focused on driving. and she was probably projecting something onto a woman who was just tired and still. People could be very still when they were tired. That was completely normal. She looked back at the road. "You doing okay back there?" Dana asked. Casual, easy, just making sure. "Yes," Sarah said. Dana nodded. "Okay, fine." She was fine. They were about halfway through the drive now. Dana made a left turn and started heading uphill toward the Northwest District. The neighborhood changed around them. Fewer streetlights, more trees, residential streets with big old houses set back from the road. Nice area. Dana drove through it sometimes just for the scenery. At the next red light, Dana looked in the mirror again. Sarah was looking at her. Not at the window, not at her phone, at Dana, directly. Her gaze was fixed on the rearview mirror, which meant she was looking exactly into Dana's eyes. Dana felt something move through her, that she later described not as fear, exactly, but as recognition, a sudden, animal certainty that something was different about this situation. Not necessarily wrong, just different. She smiled at the mirror. "Almost there," she said. Sarah did not smile. She held Dana's gaze for one more second, then looked back out the window. The light changed. Dana drove. Her hands, she noticed, were slightly tighter on the wheel than they needed to be. She told herself to relax. She told herself it was just a quiet passenger on a cold night, and her imagination was running a little hot because it was late and she was tired, and the waterfront location had maybe been slightly atmospheric. She told herself these things firmly and rationally, the way you do when part of your brain is beginning to say something your conscious mind does not want to hear yet. Then Sarah spoke. "You have driven this route before," she said. Not a question, a statement. "A few times," Dana said. "I know this area pretty well." "You drove it last Thursday too," Sarah said. "Late. Around midnight. You had a passenger who asked you to wait outside a house on Lovejoy Street while he ran inside." Dana's hands went very still on the wheel. That was true. All of it. She had not thought about that ride in a week. It had been completely unremarkable. A man who needed to grab something from a house and asked her to keep the meter running. She had waited maybe 4 minutes. It had been a perfectly normal, forgettable ride. How did Sarah know about it? "I am sorry," Dana said, keeping her voice level. "Do I know you?" "No," Sarah said, simply, flatly. "You do not know me." The silence came back, heavier than before. Dana took a breath. She gripped the wheel. She kept her eyes on the road, and her voice measured. "How did you know about that ride?" she asked. There was a pause of about 4 seconds, long enough that Dana thought maybe Sarah was not going to answer. Then, "I watch. I pay attention. I notice things." That could mean anything. Dana turned it over quickly in her mind, trying to find the rational explanation. Maybe Sarah was a regular in that neighborhood. Maybe she had seen Dana's car parked on Lovejoy Street that night and simply remembered it. Maybe she had some unusual talent for observation and memory. Maybe she was just a little odd and saying odd things to make conversation. Maybe. But there was something in the delivery of those words, flat, unhurried, with zero interest in whether they made Dana comfortable, that settled cold and heavy in Dana's chest. "That's a little unsettling to hear," Dana said, with a small laugh. She was good at the small laugh. She had used it 1,000 times. It meant, "I am not afraid of you. I am just noting that what you said was unusual, and I am still in control of this situation." Sarah did not respond to the laugh at all, as if it had not happened. They drove in silence for another minute. Dana watched the GPS. 3 more minutes to the destination. She focused on that number. 3 minutes. She could do 3 minutes. The temperature in the car had dropped again. She was certain of it this time. She could feel it on the back of her hands, on her cheeks, a cold that had nothing to do with the air coming from the vents, which were still running warm. It was a localized cold, a cold that seemed to come from the back seat. She did not let herself think too hard about that. Then Sarah said, "Your brother's name is Kevin." Dana's heart stopped. Just for a moment. Just for one terrible, lurching half-second. It stopped. And in that half-second, everything in the car felt electric and too close and wrong. She had not mentioned her brother to anyone that night. She had not mentioned him in this car, to this app, to any passenger. Ever. Kevin was 23, lived in Vancouver, Washington, worked at a warehouse. He was private, quiet, the kind of person who did not have much of a social media presence. There was no way, no reasonable, logical, explainable way that this woman in her back seat should know his name. "Excuse me?" Dana said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "Kevin," Sarah said again, as if repeating the word for her own reasons. "He called you last Tuesday. He was worried about something. You told him it was going to be okay." Dana felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. That had happened. Exactly that. Kevin had called her on Tuesday evening, upset about a situation at work, and Dana had told him those exact words, that it was going to be okay. A private phone call between two siblings. Nothing posted. Nothing public. Nothing any stranger should have access to. "Who are you?" Dana said. She heard her own voice change. The professional warmth was gone. This was her real voice, stripped down to something essential and afraid. "I told you," Sarah said. "You do not know me." "That's not an answer." "I know." Dana checked the GPS. 1 minute to the destination. 1 minute. She locked her doors. She had a habit of forgetting earlier in rides and doing it somewhere in the middle. And right now, she was intensely grateful for her own habit. She heard the click of the locks and felt marginally better. The GPS directed her to turn right onto a quiet residential street. She turned. The houses here were large and well-maintained. Old Portland craftsman homes with big front porches and mature trees in the yards. It was a lovely neighborhood. Under any other circumstances, Dana would have enjoyed driving through it. "In 40 feet, the GPS said, "your destination is on the right." Dana pulled to the curb in front of a white craftsman home with a porch light on. She put the car in park. Her whole body was rigid. "This is your stop," she said. Sarah did not move. "This is your stop," Dana said again, louder. "I know," Sarah said. She was looking out the window at the house. Her voice, for the first time, contained something Dana had not heard in it before, something that sounded almost like sadness. "I know it is." She reached for the door handle. Dana heard the door open, and the interior light came on. In its light, she got a clear look at Sarah's face for the first time, and Dana cannot tell you what was wrong with it. Even now, years later, she cannot describe what she saw. She can only say that in the second the interior light was on, something about Sarah's face was not right. Not wrong in a way she could point to. Not any feature out of place. Just wrong, in the way that sometimes things are wrong in dreams, where you look at a familiar face and feel horror without understanding why. Then Sarah got out. She closed the door. The interior light went out. Dana sat with both hands on the wheel, not moving, staring straight ahead. Then she looked in the rearview mirror. The sidewalk behind her was empty. She had watched Sarah get out of the car. She had heard the door close. She had watched her stand up straight on the sidewalk. All of that had taken, at most, 3 seconds. And in those 3 seconds, Sarah had gone from standing on the sidewalk to completely, utterly gone. There was no movement down the street. No figure retreating toward the house. No shadow moving away. The sidewalk was empty. The porch light on the white craftsman house was on. The front door of the house was closed. It was as if Sarah had simply ceased to exist. Dana sat there for a very long time. Dana drove away from that curb at a speed that she would later admit was probably not entirely safe for a residential street. She did not accelerate gradually. She pulled out and drove, her eyes going from the road to the mirror and back again, in a rhythm that felt automatic and desperate, like breathing. She pulled up to a stop sign 2 blocks away and sat there long enough that a car came up behind her and waited, then honked softly. She went through the stop sign. She pulled to the curb on the next block, in front of a house with all its windows dark, and she sat in the idling car with the heat blasting and her hands in her lap. She was shaking. She had not noticed when it started. She was just shaking, her hands trembling finely against her thighs, her breath coming out unsteady and shallow. She looked at the ride summary on her app. The ride was complete. Passenger dropped off. Her rating was there. 5 stars. Sarah, whoever or whatever she was, had rated her 5 stars. Dana pulled up her call history on her phone. Tuesday, there was Kevin's name. They had talked at 7:42 in the evening, for 11 minutes. A private phone call. She called Kevin right then. 1:41 in the morning. She called her brother and he answered on the 3rd ring, groggy and alarmed the way you are when someone calls you in the middle of the night. Dana, what's wrong? I need to ask you something, she said. The call on Tuesday. What did I tell you? A pause. You said it was going to be okay. About the work thing. Dana closed her eyes. Dana, what is going on? Are you safe? Yeah, she said. I'm safe. I'm fine. I had a weird ride. I'm fine. She went home. She did not take any more rides that night, or the night after. She reported the ride to Uber's safety team, describing the experience as best she could. They flagged the account for review. 2 days later, she received a notification that the account associated with the passenger Sarah had been deactivated. The account had been created with an email address that did not exist, and a phone number registered to a prepaid burner phone purchased with cash at a convenience store in southeast Portland. The pickup location, Waterfront Park, near the Hawthorne Bridge, had no record of any security camera footage of a woman matching Sarah's description. The address that had been entered as the destination, the white Craftsman house with the porch light on, was later confirmed by Dana to be a real house. She drove past it in the daylight a week later, just to see. The porch light was off. The house looked ordinary. She knocked on the door. An older man answered, 70s, kind face, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He had never heard of anyone named Sarah. He had lived in that house for 22 years. He had not expected any visitors the previous Thursday night, and had been asleep by 10 o'clock. There was no record of Sarah. No explanation. No answer. Only the question that Dana still carries with her, the one she cannot set down no matter how many years pass. How did Sarah know about Kevin? How did she know about the Lovejoy Street ride? And the quieter question underneath it, the one she almost never says out loud. What was wrong with Sarah's face? Dana stopped driving for Uber 3 weeks after the night with Sarah. She told herself it was because school was getting busier, which was true. She started her nursing program clinical rotations that semester and legitimately did not have the time. So it was easy to fold the two truths together and not look at which one was real. She finished nursing school. She works at a hospital now. A good one. A busy one. A place full of light and noise and people. She likes it. She is good at it. She has the calm, unflappable steadiness that the best nurses have, the kind that comes not from never having been afraid, but from having decided that fear does not get to be in charge. She still drives, just not for Uber. Never again for Uber. Kevin knows the basic version of the story. She told him about 6 months after it happened. He listened, asked a few questions, and did not try to explain it or talk her out of it. That is one of the things she loves about Kevin. He just accepted that his sister had experienced something that did not have an answer, and he let that be what it was. The waterfront at night still unsettles her. She does not walk near the river after dark if she can help it. If she is driving and her route takes her along Naito Parkway, she keeps her eyes on the road and does not look at the walking path. She is not sure what she saw that night. She is not sure what Sarah was. She does not spend much time trying to figure it out. But sometimes, in the middle of an ordinary day, she will look in a mirror, her bathroom mirror, the mirror in a patient's room at work, the rearview mirror of her car, and she will feel for just a fraction of a second like someone is on the other side of it, watching, looking back at her with calm, flat eyes and hands folded neatly in their lap. And then the feeling passes, and she goes back to her life. Because what else do you do? What else is there? Dana's story leaves us with something that I think is the most unsettling kind of question. Not the kind that can be solved, but the kind that just sits there, year after year, waiting. She learned that night that sometimes the most frightening thing is not something that threatens you. Sometimes the most frightening thing is something that simply knows you, knows things it has no right to know, and then disappears without explanation. The next story comes out of Tennessee, and what makes it different from Dana's experience is this. Marcus did not just feel watched. By the end of his ride, Marcus realized he had been tested, evaluated, and he still does not know if he passed. Now we move into our second story, where the night feels a little too quiet. The man who knew too much. Marcus Webb was 51 years old, recently retired from 22 years in the Army, and completely at a loss for what to do with himself. He will be the first to admit this. He is not a man who struggles with honesty. He is a big, quiet man with a deep voice and the kind of stillness that comes from having spent decades in environments where stillness was a professional requirement. He had done 2 tours in the Middle East, several years in administrative and logistics roles stateside, and a final stretch as a training NCO at a base in Kentucky. He had a house outside of Nashville that he shared with his dog, a 7-year-old shepherd mix named Colonel, and a routine that had structured his life for so long that without the Army's scaffolding, he genuinely did not know what to do with his Tuesday mornings. His daughter, Renee, suggested the driving. "You like being in your truck," she said. "You like having a mission." This is a mission. Renee was 28 and worked in healthcare management and was considerably smarter than Marcus about most things involving the modern world. So he listened to her. He signed up for Uber, did the orientation, passed the background check, mounted a phone holder to the dashboard of his GMC Sierra, and started taking rides. He drove the Sierra for 2 weeks before he realized that a large black pickup truck was probably not the ideal vehicle for making nervous passengers feel comfortable. He switched to his wife's old Camry she had passed 4 years ago, and the car had been sitting in the garage since then, and he did not want to sell it. Not yet, but driving it felt better than leaving it there, gathering dust. The Camry was clean and quiet and comfortable, and passengers visibly relaxed when they got in. Marcus kept it that way deliberately. He kept the interior spotless. He kept the heat, or AC, at a reasonable level. He kept his playlists inoffensive and his conversation available, but never forced. He was a good driver. He was also, by nature, a good observer. 22 years in the Army had made him attentive in ways that could seem unsettling to civilians. He noticed things, processed them quickly, and filed them away. Exits, sight lines, the way a person carried themselves, whether a room had 1 door or 2. He had taken rides in all parts of the Nashville area by the time this particular night came along. He knew the city well enough to know its rhythms, which areas woke up late, which ones went to sleep early, which roads were genuinely bad at night, and which ones only seemed that way. It was a Wednesday in February. Cold. Not Nashville cold, which was usually a soft kind of cold that locals complained about more than it deserved, but genuinely cold, the kind of cold that came down from the north and made everything feel smaller and harder. Marcus had been out since about 7 in the evening, had done 6 or 7 rides, and was thinking about calling it for the night, around 11:30 when the ping came in. The pickup location was a gas station, off Route 70, about 40 minutes southeast of Nashville, out past the suburbs, in the kind of semi-rural area where the subdivisions got farther apart and the stretches of dark road between them got longer. Marcus knew the road. He had driven it a couple of times in daylight, never at night. The destination was listed as an address in a town called Watertown, another 40 minutes east, an 80-minute round trip, potentially, for a decent surge fare. Marcus accepted. The drive out to the pickup took about 35 minutes. The road narrowed as he got farther from the city, the highway lighting falling away and the night coming in closer. His headlights picked out fence posts and bare-limbed trees and the occasional reflective marker. The Camry moved through the dark, quietly. He had Colonel in the back. He usually did not bring the dog on rides, but tonight he had not wanted to leave him alone, and he figured he could keep the dog in the back and passengers in the back, and they would manage. He pulled into the gas station. It was the only lit space for maybe a mile in any direction. A small oasis of fluorescent yellow-white light. There were no other cars. There was one person standing in the parking lot, slightly to the left of the entrance, in a spot where the light from the station did not quite reach. A man. Medium height, slim build, wearing a dark coat and a cap. He was not holding a phone. He was not looking at a phone. He was just standing there, facing the road, waiting. He walked to the Camry when Marcus pulled up. He opened the back door. He got in. He smelled like cold air and something else, something dry and old, like a room that had been closed for a long time, like paper, like dust. "Evening," Marcus said. "Good evening," the man said. His voice was quiet, precise, every syllable given its proper weight. "Watertown?" Marcus confirmed, looking at the app. "That's right," the man said. Marcus pulled out of the parking lot and back onto Route 70, heading east. Colonel, in the back seat beside the man, made a sound Marcus had never heard him make before. A low, sustained sound. Not quite a whine, and not quite a growl. Just a sound of discomfort, like a dog pressing itself against a corner. "That's Colonel," Marcus said, glancing in the mirror. "He is friendly. You okay with dogs?" "Fine," the man said. He was not looking at Colonel. He was looking straight ahead, at the dark road, through the windshield. Marcus drove. The night closed in around them. The road was quiet and dark and very long. It started about 10 minutes into the drive, and it started gently, the way it always does. The man said, "You were in the Army." Marcus glanced in the mirror. "Yes, sir. 22 years. Logistics and training," the man said. Marcus nodded slowly. "Mostly. Yeah." He had mentioned logistics on his Uber profile. He could not remember if he had mentioned training. He did not think he had. But then again, maybe he had. He had set up the profile quickly, with Renee's help, and he had not reviewed it closely since. "You served at Fort Knox, and then Fort Campbell," the man said. Marcus's hands adjusted on the wheel. Subtle, almost imperceptible. "That's right. And before that, overseas. 2 tours. Yeah. Mosul," the man said. "And then Kandahar." Marcus said nothing for a moment. The road went straight and dark ahead of them. Colonel had gone very quiet in the back seat, pressed against the far door. He had not put those deployments in his Uber profile. There was no reason to. They were personal. They were things he did not talk about easily, not with people he did not know. "How did you know that?" Marcus said. "I pay attention," the man said. That was not an answer. And Marcus knew it was not an answer. And he suspected the man knew. He knew. But the man said it with the same even, unconcerned precision he had said everything else. And it landed in the car not as a deflection, but as a statement of fact. A fact that Marcus was not going to be able to argue with, at least not tonight, at least not out here. "Do I know you?" Marcus asked. "Did we meet somewhere?" "No," the man said. "We have not met." Marcus accepted that and drove. He was not a man who panicked. He processed, and he waited, and he kept moving. That was what 22 years had taught him. You do not stop moving. You keep assessing, and you keep going, and you see what the situation becomes. The situation, right now, was a man in his back seat who knew things he should not know. Marcus classified that as unusual and potentially concerning, and filed it for ongoing attention. "Cold night," Marcus said. "Yes," the man said. Colonel let out another of those low, unhappy sounds from the corner of the back seat, and Marcus heard the man turn slightly toward the dog. He glanced in the mirror. The man was looking at Colonel. Colonel was looking at the man, and the dog, who was friendly, who had always been friendly, who had never been anything other than easy and affectionate with every person Marcus had brought him around, was trembling. Marcus's dog was trembling. He looked back at the road and breathed steadily through his nose. They were maybe 20 minutes from Watertown. The man said, "Your wife's name was Carolyn." The word was hit so hard inside Marcus's chest that he felt it in his hands. Was. Past tense. Carolyn had been dead for 4 years. But her name, he had not put her name anywhere. Not on the profile. Not anywhere associated with this app. He drove her old car, but the registration was still in her name. And even then, even if someone had checked the registration, the man had said her name with that same flat, calm certainty, as if reading from a record, as if her name were simply data he had already assembled. "Yes," Marcus said. His voice was absolutely steady. He had learned, long ago, how to keep his voice steady when his chest was doing something complicated. "She was." "I am sorry for your loss," the man said. It did not sound like a platitude. It sounded exact, specific, like the condolence of someone who knew exactly what the loss had been and was acknowledging it as a measurable, documented thing. "Thank you," Marcus said. Silence. Marcus drove. They were about 30 minutes into the drive when the man said, "Take the county road on the right, not the highway." Marcus looked at the GPS. The GPS was still routing him down the highway toward Watertown. There was a county road coming up on the right, but it was not the suggested route. "GPS has me staying on the highway," Marcus said. "The county road is faster tonight," the man said. Marcus hesitated. He thought about it for a rational 2 seconds. The county road would cut across, probably rejoin the highway closer to Watertown. In theory, it could be a small shortcut. Locals sometimes knew better than GPS routing. He took the county road. The change was immediate and complete. The road narrowed to a single lane of cracked and uneven asphalt. The tree line came right up to the shoulder dense and old growth, the kind of trees that had been there long enough to lean over the road and touch each other overhead, making a tunnel effect in the headlights. There were no road markers, no painted lines, no lights whatsoever except what the Camry's headlights threw forward. Marcus drove carefully and steadily. He had driven bad roads before. He was not intimidated by bad roads. "How far does this road go?" he asked. "A few miles," the man said. "And it comes out near Watertown?" "It comes out where you need to be," the man said. Marcus's jaw tightened very slightly. He was keeping his cool, but he was calibrating now, actively, the way he had been trained to calibrate in situations where the normal framework of expectations was starting to shift. He was aware of the weight of the truck, the condition of the road, how far they were from any other vehicle or building or source of help. He was aware of his phone in the mount. He was aware of the man behind him, still and precise, in the dark. "What's in Watertown?" Marcus asked. "Conversational," Easy. Unfinished business, the man said. Marcus said nothing. A mile down the county road, Colonel made a different sound, not the low discomfort sound from earlier. This was sharper, a single high-pitched sound that the dog immediately suppressed, the way a very frightened animal will suppress its own distress, because instinct tells it that making noise is dangerous. That sound, more than anything else that night, made Marcus deeply afraid, because Colonel was not a dog who frightened easily. He was a trained, steady animal who had been around loud machinery and chaotic environments and large groups of strangers. He had never made that sound in his life. The man spoke again. "You are thinking about stopping the car." Marcus said nothing. "You do not need to be afraid of me," the man said. And then, after a half beat, with something in his voice that was not quite warmth, but was adjacent to it, "That is not what tonight is." "Then, what is tonight?" Marcus said. The man did not answer immediately. When he did, it was with a kind of unhurried deliberateness that suggested he had decided to offer something, not because Marcus had asked, but because he had judged the offering to be appropriate. "Tonight is an accounting," he said, "of a certain kind." "An accounting of what?" "Of character," the man said. "Yours, specifically." The trees opened up ahead of them. The county road ran out into a wider paved road, and in the distance, Marcus could see the lights of a small town. Watertown, presumably. "Turn right," the man said. Marcus turned right. They drove into the edge of the town. Small, quiet, most of its lights off. The kind of town that went to sleep early and meant it. Marcus followed the man's directions. A left turn, then a right, then straight, until they reached a T-intersection at the edge of town, where an old building sat back from the road, with no lights in the windows and a gravel parking area in front of it. "Here," the man said. Marcus stopped. He put the car in park. He looked at the building. It was old. It might have been a church at some point, or a meeting hall. The windows were dark. The gravel lot was empty. He looked in the rearview mirror. "There is nothing here," he said. "There is what has always been here," the man said. He was looking at the building, not at Marcus, not at the mirror. His eyes were fixed on the dark windows of that old, lightless structure. And in his face was something that Marcus could only describe later as conclusion, like a man who had been traveling for a very long time and had finally arrived at the place he needed to be. "I need you to understand something," the man said, and his voice had changed. It was the same voice, same precision, same evenness, but it had shifted in temperature. Something in it that had been cool was now something else, something that Marcus could not name, but could feel. "The people we carry matter. Every single one. You understand that?" It was not a question. "Yeah," Marcus said quietly. "I understand that." "You have carried people carefully," the man said. "In many vehicles, in many conditions. You have brought people from where they were to where they needed to be. You have not been careless with that, even tonight. Even on a road you did not know, with a passenger you could not account for, you stayed steady. You kept moving. You did not abandon the responsibility." Marcus was very still. "That is what I came to observe," the man said. "And what I came to confirm." "Confirm for who?" Marcus said. The man opened the door. He got out of the car. He stood in the gravel lot in front of the old building. He turned, and for the first time in the entire drive, he looked directly at Marcus through the open door. In the ambient light of the Camry's interior, Marcus got a full look at his face. He has never been able to fully describe what he saw. He has tried. He has sat with Renee and talked about it for hours. He has tried to find the words in his own considerable vocabulary of human experience. He can only say that the man's face was the face of someone who had been watching for a very long time. Not old exactly, not young, simply long, as if duration itself had settled into the features, the way stone wears around water. "Your wife says the car suits you," the man said. Then he closed the door. Marcus sat and did not move for approximately 2 minutes. Then, because he was Marcus, because he had been trained to keep moving, because stopping in a dark parking lot in an unfamiliar town was objectively not his best option, he put the car in drive. He turned around. He drove back through Watertown. He found the highway. He drove home. He checked the app before he left the parking lot. The ride had ended. There was no rating. There was no message. The account associated with the passenger simply read, "Account not found." He drove 90 minutes home with Colonel curled in the back seat, no longer trembling, pressing his big, warm head against the back of the front seat. And Marcus drove with one hand on the wheel and the other reaching back to rest on the dog's neck. And he did not turn on the radio, and he did not stop thinking about what the man had said. Your wife says the car suits you. Carolyn had picked out the Camry. Renee had come with Carolyn to the dealership when they bought it 8 years ago. Marcus had not been there. He had been at a training exercise. Carolyn had texted him a picture from the lot. This one. It suits us. He had never told anyone that story. He was almost certain he had never even thought about it in the context of driving for Uber. Marcus still drives. That is the part that surprises most people when they hear this story. He thought about quitting. He sat with the thought for about a week after the night on the county road. He turned it over honestly, the way he did with most things. He decided that quitting would be the wrong conclusion to draw from the experience. He is not sure what he met that night. He has a number of frameworks he could apply: religious, psychological, cultural, and he has tried most of them on and found that none of them fit quite right. What he is left with is the experience itself, uninterpreted, which is his standard operating procedure for things that resist interpretation. He drives 3 nights a week now. He takes every passenger with the same steadiness he brought to that county road in February. He does not bring Colonel anymore, which the dog seems fine with. He has thought often about what the man said. The people we carry matter, and he has come to believe it more completely than he believed it before. Not because a strange man in a dark coat told him to, but because the experience showed him something true about himself that he had not quite articulated until someone else articulated it for him. He visited Carolyn's grave the week after it happened. He sat there for a while in the cold and did not talk, just sat. He is not sure why. He is not a man who feels the need to explain everything he does. But before he left, he put his hand on the stone and he said, "I'm glad it suits me." He drove home. He fed Colonel. He made himself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. And outside the window, the Tennessee winter was dark and still. And for the first time in a long time, he did not feel like he was at a loss for what to do. There is something about Marcus's story that settles differently from Dana's, less with fear and more with an eerie kind of wonder. A sense that the night contains things we do not have complete categories for. But our next story does not leave you with wonder. Our next story leaves you with something simpler and more visceral. The complete and total wrongness of looking in a mirror and seeing that what is behind you is not behaving the way reality says it should. Priya was 23 years old and had been driving for Uber for exactly 11 weeks when she picked up a woman named Claire on a winter night in Chicago. She has driven for Uber exactly once since then. Let's continue with the third story and go deeper into the shadows. Priya Nair had moved to Chicago from a small suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio, for a job at a marketing firm that she was quietly discovering was not quite what had been described to her during the interview process. The firm was real. The work was real. It was simply smaller and more exhausting, and less well compensated than she had been led to believe. And she was 23, and smart enough to know that this was a very common experience, but tired enough on most weeknights to resent it anyway. She had started driving for Uber because the math was simple. She needed more money than her salary provided, and driving gave her the flexibility to work whenever she had time, which was mostly on weekends and a few evenings during the week. She had a 2020 Toyota Corolla in navy blue that she kept very clean and had furnished with the minimum required driver amenities: a phone mount, a charging cable in the back for passengers, and a small package of breath mints in the cup holder that she could not explain why she kept restocking. She had been driving for 11 weeks and had logged, by her estimate, around 200 rides. She had not had a single incident in those 200 rides. She had had a handful of mildly uncomfortable passengers. People who smelled bad, people who were rude, one man who had been so aggressively trying to make conversation that she had spent an entire 30-minute ride tensed up, but nothing that had made her feel genuinely unsafe. She had started to feel like she was getting good at this, like she had a handle on it. She thought about that later, after everything. How the feeling of having a handle on something is very often the universe's cue to prove you wrong. The night in question was a Friday in December. Chicago was doing what Chicago does in December, making no apologies for itself. The temperature was 12 degrees with a wind chill that pushed it into the negative numbers, and the city looked simultaneously beautiful and punishing under a sky that had been uniformly gray for 6 days. She had been out since about 8 in the evening, working the bar crowd, which on a cold Friday in Chicago tended to start moving around 10 and peak around midnight. By midnight, she had done a dozen rides and was feeling the pleasant fatigue of a productive shift. She decided she would take maybe 2 or 3 more rides and then call it. The ping came in at 12:14. The pickup was a bar on North Clark Street in Lincoln Park. A normal, busy, well-lit bar on a street full of normal, busy, well-lit bars. The passenger name on the app read Claire. No rating shown, which usually meant a new account. But new accounts were not unusual people, signed up for Uber all the time. She pulled up to the bar. A woman came out almost immediately, as if she had been watching for the car. She was in her early 30s maybe, with straight dark hair cut to her jaw and a long gray coat over a dark dress. She looked like someone coming from a work event or a dinner, polished, composed, unremarkable. She smiled when she got in, a normal, tired smile. "Hi, thanks for coming," she said. Her voice was warm and a little hoarse, the way voices get after a long evening of talking. "Of course," Priya said. "Long night?" "You have no idea," Claire said, with a little laugh that sounded completely genuine. They talked for the first few minutes. Light, easy conversation, the cold, the bar. Whether this part of Lincoln Park had always been this busy, or if it had gotten worse recently. Claire was engaged and pleasant and funny in a dry, deadpan way that Priya appreciated. Everything about the interaction was completely, normally human. Priya drove north on Clark, heading toward the Lakeview address the GPS had loaded as the destination. The traffic had thinned out, and the road was clear. The city lights reflected off the wind-scoured street and made everything look slightly unreal in the way Chicago always did in winter. Too sharp, too bright, too cold. She glanced in the rearview mirror to check her blind spot as she changed lanes. Claire was in the mirror. She was looking at her phone, which was lit up in her hand, and she was smiling at something she had read. A normal image. A normal moment in an Uber at midnight. Priya looked back at the road. She drove 2 blocks. She checked the mirror again. Claire was looking at her phone, but in the mirror, Claire was looking out the window. Priya blinked. She looked again. In the mirror, Claire, the reflected Claire, was definitely looking out the window, head slightly turned to the left, her face angled toward the glass. But in the actual back seat, in the actual physical space that Priya could see from the corner of her vision, Claire was looking down at her phone. They were doing different things. Priya looked away. She drove for a second. She told herself she was tired and had misread what she saw. The mirror was not perfectly aligned. She had been meaning to adjust it, and maybe the angle was distorting things in a way that made it look like the reflection was off. That was a completely reasonable explanation. She liked that explanation. She looked in the mirror again. The reflection of Claire was now facing forward, looking at the back of the front seat. The actual Claire, in the back seat, was still looking at her phone, still lit up in her hand, still real. The reflection was not matching. Priya's throat went dry. She swallowed. She kept her face completely neutral and kept driving, and thought about this as rationally as she could manage for approximately 25 seconds. Mirror angles, refraction, fatigue, her own bias, the way the mind creates pattern from chaos when it is tired. She checked the mirror one more time. The reflection of Claire was looking directly at the mirror, at Priya, with an expression on its face that the actual Claire, still looking at her phone, still oblivious, still smiling at something she was reading, did not have. The reflection was watching her. Priya realized she was holding her breath. She exhaled. She turned on the radio, a soft rock station, because she needed sound in the car right now, and she did not want to do anything that would make her passenger notice that something was wrong. "Cold enough for you out there?" she said. Casual, light. "God, I hate December," Claire said, still looking at her phone. In the mirror, the reflected Claire did not react to the words at all. She was still watching Priya. Priya drove. She focused on the road. She told herself not to look in the mirror again. She told herself this firmly, the way you tell yourself not to look down when you are somewhere high and with about as much success. She looked in the mirror. The reflection of Claire had her hands in her lap. Both hands, visible, empty. The actual Claire had her phone in her right hand and was typing with her left. Priya turned on more lights in the car. As naturally as she could, she had a dashboard lighting control, and she nudged it slightly brighter, claiming to herself that she needed it to see the road better. In the brighter light, the situation did not improve. The discrepancy between Claire and Claire's reflection was not something that more light explained away. It became, if anything, more visible. The reflection was a half-second behind, sometimes, or doing something entirely different. There was no pattern Priya could find. The actual Claire would turn her head to look out the window, and the reflection would remain facing forward for a long 3 count before it slowly turned. Or Claire would reach up to touch her hair, and the reflection would not reach up at all, would instead fold its hands in its lap with a deliberateness that felt almost like demonstration, as if it were showing Priya something, as if it wanted to be noticed. Priya drove with both hands on the wheel and her eyes alternating between the road and the mirror with a desperate, almost mechanical regularity. She checked the GPS. 4 minutes to the destination. 4 minutes. She tried to think of explanations. She went through them one by one. She was tired. The mirror angle was off. She was experiencing some kind of visual processing issue related to stress and fatigue. There was something about the way the rear lighting worked that made it look like the reflection was doing something different. None of these explanations held. She knew, on the most fundamental level, that the reflection in that mirror was not obeying the rules that reflections are supposed to obey. And the knowledge of that, the inability to explain it, the inability to dismiss it, was expanding inside her chest in a way that was becoming hard to contain. Claire said something. Priya almost jumped. "Sorry?" Priya managed. I said, "Do you drive a lot of nights like this? Super late?" Yeah, Priya said. "Mostly nights." "I bet you see some interesting people," Claire said. Still looking at her phone, still pleasant, still completely unaware, or apparently unaware, that anything was wrong. In the mirror, the reflection of Claire was no longer looking at Priya. It was looking up, at the ceiling of the car, its face tilted back, eyes directed upward, in a position that the actual Claire was absolutely not in. It was looking at the ceiling with an expression that Priya could not interpret. Not afraid, not threatening, just attentive, as if it were listening to something above it that Priya could not hear. I see some interesting people, Priya agreed. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of herself for that. 2 minutes to the destination. She was going to make it. She was going to get Claire out of her car, and she was going to pull over somewhere and breathe and figure out what was happening to her, and she was going to be okay. She looked in the mirror. One more time, the reflection of Claire was gone. Not looking away, not positioned differently. Gone. The back seat in the mirror was empty. The actual Claire was still there. Priya could see her. She could hear her breathing, hear the small sounds of her typing on her phone. But the mirror showed an empty back seat. Priya went cold from the inside out. Then it came back. Between one blink and the next, the reflection of Claire was simply there again, sitting normally, doing what Claire was doing, completely synchronized for the first time, as if it had returned from wherever it had been and was trying to look normal, as if it knew. Priya had seen 1 minute to the destination. Priya made the last turn onto Claire's street. She found the address, a nice mid-rise apartment building with a lit entrance. She pulled to the curb. She put the car in park. She looked at the mirror. Claire and her reflection were in sync, both looking up, both reaching for their bag. "This is great, thank you so much," Claire said. Her voice was warm and easy, and completely normal. "Of course," Priya said. She heard her own voice from a distance. Claire opened the door. She got out. She leaned back in for a moment. "Stay warm out there. Be safe." "You too," Priya said. The door closed. Priya looked in the mirror. The reflection of Claire was still in the back seat. Not Claire. Claire had gotten out. Claire was on the sidewalk. Priya could see her through the window, walking toward the building entrance, fishing keys out of her bag. But in the mirror, the back seat was not empty. The reflection of Claire was still there, sitting in exactly the position Claire had been sitting in. Not moving, not looking at anything. Just sitting, its hands in its lap, its face neutral. Priya made a sound that was not quite a scream, and not quite a word. She threw the car into drive and pulled away from the curb so fast that her tires chirped on the cold pavement. She drove 4 blocks before she stopped at a red light and forced herself to look in the mirror again. The back seat was empty. Completely, normally, mercifully empty. She sat at the green light for 5 seconds, while the car behind her waited. Then she drove. She did not stop until she found an open gas station 3 miles away, with lights blazing and a clerk visible behind the glass, and she pulled in and sat in the brightness and shook for a solid 10 minutes while her heater ran and her radio played and the world outside stayed ordinary and still. She checked the app. The ride was complete. Claire had rated her 5 stars. The review, visible only to Priya, said, "Smooth ride. Very professional. Very professional." She went home. She did not sleep. She sat in her apartment with every light in the place on and scrolled through her phone until the sun came up over the city and the gray December sky got marginally brighter. And somewhere in there, she made the decision that she was done driving for a while. She tried to go back to driving 6 months later. She did 1 ride, a daytime ride, a short trip, a friendly passenger, nothing remarkable. She got home and checked her mirrors 14 times before she could make herself get out of the car. She has not driven since. She tells the story occasionally at the specific request of people who know she has it. She tells it carefully and without embellishment because she is a precise person and she does not want to add anything to what she actually experienced. What she actually experienced is, she thinks, enough. She has thought about it from many angles. She has a practical mind, and she has tried practical explanations, some kind of dissociative visual experience, a brief and stress-induced perceptual glitch. She is not completely unwilling to accept those explanations. What she cannot account for, even with those explanations in hand, is the fact that the reflection was gone for those terrible 10 seconds. Not doing the wrong thing, not out of sync, gone. You can explain a reflection that behaves wrongly. She has tried. There are optical possibilities. There are neurological possibilities. But you cannot explain an empty mirror when the seat behind it is occupied. That is not a perceptual glitch. That is something else. She has not been able to work out what Claire was. She has not been able to work out what the reflection was, or where it went, or why it came back. She has, after a lot of thinking, arrived at a place of careful non-conclusion. She does not know. She does not need to know. What she knows is that on one December night in Chicago, something that was not quite right got into her car, and it was very careful about making sure she noticed. She does not know why it wanted her to notice. That is the part that she cannot let go of, even now. Not what it was, but why it wanted to be seen. Priya's story is the kind that gets under your skin in a particular way, not because of what happened exactly, but because of the question it leaves behind. Why would something work so hard to make itself noticed? What does it gain from being seen? I do not have that answer. What I do have is our next story, which comes from Tom in Albuquerque, and which trades the cold and gray of Chicago winter for the open, enormous dark of the New Mexico desert. Tom's story has a question at its center too, a question that was asked of him by a passenger in the middle of nowhere at the end of a long, long road. He has been trying to answer it ever since. Now it's time for our fourth story. And something is watching in the dark. The question at the end of the road: Tom Girardi was 44 years old, divorced 2 years, driving Uber on weekends to supplement the income from the auto parts store he managed in Albuquerque. He was not unhappy. He was also not particularly happy. He was in the medium ground that follows the end of a marriage. Not the acute grief of the first months, but the longer, quieter landscape of rebuilding something that you have not quite figured out the shape of yet. He drove mostly on Friday and Saturday nights when his kids were with their mother, and occasionally during the week when he had evening availability, and felt the need for something to do with himself. He drove a 2019 Ford Focus. Gray, practical, good on gas. He had a cooler in the back with water, and a couple of those small bags of pretzels that he put out partly for passengers, and partly because he liked knowing they were there. He knew Albuquerque well. He had grown up in the city, lived there his whole life, knew which streets flooded when it rained and which traffic lights had the longest cycles, and where to find parking on a Saturday night in Old Town. He knew the surrounding landscape too, the mesa, the mountains visible to the east, the long flat stretches of desert highway that headed out in every direction from the city, like spokes on a wheel. He had driven all of them at some point. He was not someone who got lost. On the Tuesday night in question, he had been driving since about 5 in the afternoon, taking early evening rides, and had been thinking about quitting around 9 when the app showed a surge in effect, and he decided to stay out a little longer. The surge was moderate, but the rides were flowing, and he was in the rhythm of it. That particular state where the city becomes a pattern you move through efficiently and almost unconsciously. The ping that changed everything came in at 9:47. The pickup location was Albuquerque International Sunport, the airport. Airport pickups were usually good. Reliable passengers, often decent tips, and the GPS routing was straightforward. But the destination that loaded alongside the pickup was unusual. It was an address on Highway 60 east of Albuquerque, a specific rural address out in the desert, in an area Tom knew by general reputation as empty. Scrub, rock, the occasional ranch entrance marked by a cattle gate and a mailbox. The drive was listed at 41 minutes. The surge fare made it worthwhile. He accepted. The airport pickup went normally. passenger came out of the terminal. A man, late 50s or early 60s, Tom guessed. Compact build, a dark jacket, a single carry-on bag. He had the look of someone who traveled frequently. Efficient, no wasted motion, the particular ease of a person who was comfortable in transit environments. He loaded his bag in the trunk and got in the back seat. "Evening," Tom said. "Evening," the man said. Quiet, but not unfriendly. They pulled out of the terminal loop and headed east. The night was clear and dry and cold in the sharp-edged way of New Mexico desert nights, where the air goes thin and the stars overhead are unnervingly bright, and the city lights make an island of brightness in an ocean of absolute dark. Tom drove the highway on-ramp, merged into traffic, and began making his way east. For the first 20 minutes, they did not speak much. Tom offered the standard options. Did he want music? Was the temperature okay? And the man said yes and yes, both times in the same politely minimal way. He did not look at his phone. He sat with his hands on his knees and looked out the window at the desert moving past in the dark. Tom found himself glancing at the man more than usual. Not suspiciously, just curiously. There was something in the man's posture, in the way he held himself, that was not quite like the posture of a tired traveler coming home from a business trip. He did not have the looseness of someone who had been sitting on a plane for hours and was relieved to be in a car. He was very upright, very present, like someone arriving at a destination they had been anticipating for a long time. The city fell away behind them. The highway stretched out, straight and dark, into the desert. "You know this road?" the man asked. "Some of it," Tom said. "I have driven maybe the first 15 miles or so out of the city. After that, I am going by GPS." "The road goes a long way east," the man said, "all the way to Magdalena and beyond." "You know this area?" Tom asked. "I know most areas," the man said simply. They drove for another 10 minutes in silence. The last lights of the city were visible in the rearview mirror now, a glow on the underside of the horizon, getting smaller. Ahead was the road, and the desert, and the stars. Tom checked the GPS. 19 minutes remaining. He adjusted the rearview mirror slightly. It had vibrated out of position on the rough on-ramp. When he adjusted it, he got a clear look at his passenger's face, properly, for the first time since they had left the airport. In the glow of the dashboard lights, the man looked older than Tom had initially thought. Not in a way he could pinpoint to any specific feature. Just older. Lined, but not in the way of someone who had aged. In the way of someone who was very, very patient. The man was looking at him. Not the window, not his phone, not the dark desert going by outside. At Tom, in the mirror. "Do you enjoy the driving?" the man asked. "Most nights," Tom said. "Honest. Tonight's been pretty good. I like the highway." "You like the open space?" the man said. "Yeah," Tom said. "I grew up here. I like when the city opens up." "Tell me about where you grew up," the man said. It was a slightly unusual request for a passenger to make. Not alarming, some passengers liked conversation, liked hearing the driver's story, but unusual in its directness. Tom talked for a little while. He talked about Albuquerque, about his neighborhood, about his father who had worked for the city's water department, and his mother who had taught middle school. He talked about the landscape, about how the desert looks different at different times of year, about the particular quality of light in October in New Mexico that painters came from all over to try to capture. The man listened. He did not interject. He did not make the sounds, the hums, and yeses that people normally make when listening to indicate engagement. He just listened, with complete and total attention, as if recording everything. "Do you have children?" the man asked when Tom had finished. "Two," Tom said. 13 and 10, a boy and a girl, the man said. Tom had not specified. "Yeah," he said carefully. "Noah and Lily." The man nodded once, as if confirming something. "How did you know that?" Tom said. "Statistical reasoning," the man said, which was not an answer, but was delivered so equably that Tom was not sure how to push back on it. He checked the GPS. 11 minutes. The road was very dark. They were the only car visible in either direction, for as far as the headlights and the mirrors reached. The desert on both sides was flat and featureless in the dark. The stars above were phenomenal, the kind of stars you never see from inside the city. Thick and white and close. The kind that make you feel simultaneously large and very small. Do you think about what comes after? The man asked. Tom glanced in the mirror. After what? After everything, the man said. Tom thought about it seriously for a moment, because the question deserved seriousness. Sometimes, he said, not as much as I probably should. Why not? I am pretty busy with what is in front of me, Tom said. The kids, the job, all of it. The man was quiet for a moment. Then, that is not a wrong answer. Tom was not sure it was the right answer either, but he appreciated the man's assessment. 8 minutes. Around the 6-minute mark, the GPS recalculated. Tom watched the screen. The route had not changed. It was still directing him east on Highway 60. But the estimated time had jumped from 6 minutes to 11, without any visible change in their speed. Without any change in the route, he looked at the GPS. It showed his position accurately. He could see the road beneath the marker. But the destination pin had moved. Not to a different road, just further east than it had been a moment ago. Huh, he said. GPS is acting up a little. It will correct, the man said. Tom drove. He kept his eye on the GPS. The estimated time ticked down normally for a couple of minutes, then jumped again to 14 minutes, then back to 7. He was not lost. He was on a straight road. There was nowhere to go wrong on a straight road. But the destination kept shifting. The estimated time kept changing, in a way that made him feel like the ground ahead of him was less fixed than it appeared. What's at this address? Tom asked. House? Ranch? Business? A pause. A specific place, the man said. A house? Not exactly, the man said. Tom kept his tone even. Can you be a little more specific? I want to make sure I'm getting you to the right spot. You are getting me to the right spot, the man said. You have been all along. The GPS recalculated again. Now the estimated time was 3 minutes. The destination pin was stationary. Tom peered at the screen. The address was still the same, but the satellite view, when he toggled to it, showed nothing. No structures, no marked roads, just desert. There is no house at this address, Tom said. No, the man agreed. Is there anything there? The man was quiet for a moment. Then, there is everything there. Tom processed this. He drove. His headlights showed the road ahead, and beyond the headlight reach, nothing. Just the absence of light in all directions. The desert dark that was unlike any other dark, because it was so enormous and so still. I'm going to need you to explain what that means, Tom said. Drive another 2 minutes, the man said. Then stop. You will understand. Tom drove. He kept his speed steady. He watched the GPS. He watched the road. He thought about his options, which were limited on a straight desert highway at 10:30 at night, and decided that driving 2 more minutes was not an unreasonable concession to make. He had driven in worse situations for less reason. 2 minutes later, the GPS said, "You have arrived." Tom slowed. He looked out the windshield. The road ahead of him continued east, straight and unbroken, into the dark. On the right shoulder was a wide, flat pullout, unpaved, just compressed desert soil, the kind of pull-off that truckers used on long routes. He pulled over and stopped. He looked out. There was nothing. Desert in every direction. Stars above. The highway behind them glowing faintly where it curved a 1/4 mile back. No structures. No markers. No lights. Just the enormous dark. and the enormous silence. "This is it?" Tom said. "This is where I need to be," the man said. Tom turned slightly in his seat so he could see the man more directly. "I have to ask, are you going to be okay out here? There is nothing for miles." The man looked at him, and Tom got the full effect of his face in the dashboard light, and it was the same face he had looked at in the mirror earlier. Patient, lined, old in a way that was not a function of years, but there was something in it now that had not been there before. The man looked at Tom with an expression of recognition, of something that Tom could only describe later as familiarity, as if he were seeing someone he had expected to see. And the seeing of them was exactly what he had come for. "I want to ask you something," the man said. "Okay," Tom said. "On the night your wife told you she was leaving," the man said, "you drove out here. You drove this road. You pulled off somewhere near here, and you sat for a long time. Do you remember what you decided?" Tom stared at him. This was true. This was a true thing that Tom had never told anyone. Not his brother, not his therapist, not his friends. On the night that his wife, his ex-wife, now had told him their marriage was over, he had gotten in his car at 2 a.m. and driven. He had driven east on Highway 60, out into the desert, until the city was gone behind him, and there was nothing but dark and road. He had pulled off. He had sat, and he had thought about what he was going to do. Not just with the marriage, with all of it, with the rest of his life. He had made a decision, sitting in the desert at 2 a.m. A quiet, private, completely internal decision that he had never put into words for another person. "How do you know that?" Tom said. His voice was strange in his own ears. "I was here," the man said. "When I drove out here?" Tom said. "That was 2 years ago." "Time is not my limitation," the man said. They looked at each other. The desert was absolutely silent around them. Tom could hear his own breathing, and nothing else. "What did you decide?" the man asked. "Tell me. Put it into words." Tom thought about it. He knew the answer. He had known it since the night in the desert. It had been the thing that had gotten him through the 2 years that followed. He had just never said it to anyone. "I decided I was staying," Tom said. "Not in the marriage. I knew that was over. I decided I was staying in my life, in Albuquerque, with the kids, in all of it. I decided not to disappear." The man nodded slowly. "Then you already have your answer," he said. He opened the door. He got out. He got his bag from the trunk. Tom heard the small sounds of it, and he stood in the pullout with his carry-on and looked east, out into the desert, where there was nothing. Tom looked in the mirror, looked at the man. He was not going to ask. He was not sure he wanted the answer. He put the car in drive and pulled back onto the highway. He drove west. The city's glow grew in front of him, and the man with the carry-on bag disappeared behind him into the dark. He checked the rearview mirror 3 times on the drive home. The road was empty every time. There was no figure walking. There was nothing. At some point, the app marked the ride complete. The fare was on his phone when he got home. The passenger account, when he tried to look it up later, showed an account deactivated for terms of service violation reason, not specified. Tom told his daughter Lily about the experience about a year later, in a simplified version that left out the parts that were hardest to explain. She listened very seriously, the way 10-year-olds sometimes do when they sense they are being trusted with something real. "Were you scared?" she asked. "A little," Tom said. "Yeah, but you're okay?" "I'm okay," he said. She seemed satisfied with that. She went back to whatever she had been doing, and Tom watched her for a minute. This kid, his kid, and thought about what the man in the desert had said. "Then you already have your answer." He drives less often now, not because of what happened, but because his situation changed, a new relationship, a schedule that filled in naturally, more reasons to be home. He keeps his Uber account active. On occasion, he takes it out. On a Friday night when things are quiet and he feels like moving. He drives east when he drives. The highway, the desert, the stars. He has pulled off at that spot once since then. Sat there for a while. Looked at the dark. The desert does not have answers, obviously. It is just empty space and silence and extraordinary sky. But there is something in the silence that he finds useful. Something in the enormity of it. He decided, sitting out there the second time, that the question the man had asked him was the right question. Not what comes after, not what went wrong, but what did you decide? What are you deciding? He decided he was staying. He decides it every day. Tom's story carries a quality that I find sits differently than pure fear. Something almost like a dream you do not entirely want to wake from, even knowing it is strange. But I promised you 5 stories tonight, and the 5th is the one I have been holding back. Not because it is the most violent, not because it is the most dramatic, but because it is the one that is most difficult to look at directly, the one that keeps slipping sideways every time you try to think it through. Garrett's story from Seattle is, in the end, about something very simple, a record that does not match reality. And in that gap between the record and the real, something lives that none of us should look at too long. Finally, our 5th and last story. But not everything wants you to finish it. The ride that never happened. Garrett Hale was 37, a graphic designer who worked remotely for a firm in San Francisco and lived in Seattle's Fremont neighborhood in a second-floor apartment above a coffee shop. He was slim, slightly reserved, the kind of person who was very good in one-on-one conversation and slightly overwhelmed by groups. He had a cat named Chester. He had an expensive coffee setup in his kitchen that he had assembled piece by piece over 3 years. He ran 3 mornings a week, more in summer, less in winter, and felt guilty about this in a very Seattle way. He had started driving for Uber a year and a half earlier, partly for the money and partly because he spent too many hours alone in his apartment working. And driving at least put him in contact with the world in a structured and low-pressure way. He drove Wednesday through Saturday evenings, usually starting around 8 and going until midnight or 1. He was good at it. He had excellent spatial awareness, good with navigation, and the slightly detached conversational style that many passengers preferred over forced cheerfulness. He drove a 2021 Subaru Outback in dark green. Because of course he did. He kept it spotless. He had a small plant hanging from his rearview mirror, a fake succulent in a tiny clay pot that a friend had given him as a joke, which he had kept because it made passengers smile. He had never had an incident in a year and a half of driving. He had never felt unsafe. He had had the full range of passenger personalities: awkward, gregarious, drunk, exhausted, occasionally rude, occasionally inexplicably generous, and had come through all of it with his equanimity intact. He was a practical, rational person. He did not believe in things he could not verify. He wants to make sure you know that about him. He has told this story enough times that he has a standard preamble now, and that is part of it. He is practical and rational, and did not, before this, believe in things he could not verify. On a Saturday night in March, he picked up 2 passengers from a bar in Capitol Hill. It was just after 11. The bar was busy and warm, and the couple who came out were normal. Visibly, a couple. Mid-30s, close together, comfortable with each other's physical presence, in that unconscious way that only comes from years. The man was tall, dark-coated, calm. The woman was shorter, fair-haired, in a long cardigan and boots. Both of them were completely sober. Neither of them had the imprecision of intoxication. They moved clearly, spoke clearly. Their eyes were steady. They got in the back seat. They said good evening. The destination loaded. A residential address in Queen Anne. Maybe 15 minutes away. Nice night, the woman said to Garrett. If you like 40 degrees and overcast, Garrett said. He did this dry weather commentary as a standard opener. The woman laughed. Seattle always. The man smiled at the window. He seemed content to be along for the ride, comfortable in his silence. They drove. The 15 minutes passed easily and smoothly. The woman made occasional conversation with Garrett, not demanding, just friendly. The man watched the city go by. They seemed like a perfectly nice couple heading home from an ordinary Saturday night. Garrett pulled up to the address in Queen Anne. A residential street, nice houses, well-maintained. He pulled to the curb. The couple said thank you, got out, and walked up the path toward the house. The lights were off in the house, but that was normal. You could have a key. It could be your house. The lights do not have to be on. They walked up the path together, close together, and Garrett pulled away from the curb. He noted, in that peripheral, professional way that drivers note things, that the woman had left her cardigan on the back seat. He pulled forward 50 feet, put his hazards on, and reached back to grab the cardigan, thinking he would call it in to Uber's lost and found system. It was a nice cardigan, cashmere, or close to it. Someone would want it back. He looked out the window toward the house to see if he could catch them before they went inside. The path to the house was empty. The couple was gone. No lights had come on in the house. The front door was closed. In 50 feet and maybe 20 seconds, they had disappeared completely. He told himself they had gone in quickly. He hung the cardigan on his passenger seat headrest as a reminder to report it, and drove away. On Monday morning, Garrett received a call from a Seattle Police Department detective named Reyes. The detective was professional and courteous and got to the point quickly. Had Garrett made a pickup from a bar in Capitol Hill on Saturday evening, around 11:15? Had he driven 2 passengers, a man and a woman, to an address in Queen Anne? Yes, Garrett said. He had. Detective Reyes asked him to come to the station to talk. Not as a suspect, he was reassured they were gathering information about the passengers. Garrett went in that afternoon. At the station, Detective Reyes and a partner sat across from Garrett and asked him to describe the 2 passengers in detail. He described them: the man's height and dark coat, the woman's fair hair and cardigan. Yes, the detective confirmed. That sounded consistent. Was there anything unusual about their behavior during the ride? Garrett thought about it. No. They had been polite, quiet, entirely ordinary. The woman had been friendly, the man pleasant. Nothing had alarmed him. Detective Reyes showed him 2 photographs. The photographs were of a man and a woman. The man was tall, with a dark coat. The woman was fair-haired. They were the couple Garrett had driven. The detective told Garrett that the couple in the photographs had been reported missing that morning by family members. They had been missing, according to the family, since Friday. The night before Garrett had driven them, Garrett looked at the detective. He said, "I drove them Saturday night." The detective said, "Yes. According to your app data, you did." There was a pause. "But according to every other piece of information we have," Detective Reyes said carefully, "this couple has not been seen or located since Friday evening." Garrett said, "I drove them Saturday night. I have a record of the ride. The app has a record." "Ass." The detective said, "Yes, it does." Another pause. "Then what is the question?" Garrett said. Detective Reyes looked at him. "The question," he said, "is where they were between Friday evening and Saturday night, and where they went when you dropped them off." Garrett went home and pulled up his ride history on the app. The ride was there. Complete record. Pickup time, pickup location, destination, trip duration, fare, completion. He had driven a ride to that Queen Anne address at 11:17 on Saturday night. He looked up the address. It was a real house on a real street. He had driven to it. He had his GPS record to confirm. He called up the GPS history on his phone and found the route. There it was. The Capitol Hill pickup, the route northwest, the Queen Anne drop-off. Everything was documented. He sat with this for a while. He was a rational person. He built a rational framework. He had driven 2 people. Those 2 people were missing. The last confirmed sighting of them, according to the police, was Friday. He had a confirmed record of seeing them Saturday night. Therefore, he was the last person known to have seen them before their disappearance continued or concluded. He was a material witness. That was the rational framework. That was the story that fit the documented evidence. The thing that did not fit was smaller, and he tried to set it aside, but it would not stay set aside. It was the moment on the path to the house, the 50 feet of distance and 20 seconds of time in which the couple had gone from visible and real on the sidewalk to completely, entirely absent, and no lights had come on in the house, and the front door had not opened. He called Detective Reyes and told him about the path, about the disappearance in 50 feet. The detective listened carefully and said he would look into it. Garrett asked, "What does look into it mean?" The detective said, "It means I'm going to look into it." The house in Queen Anne was not the couple's address. It was a house owned by an elderly woman who had been in the hospital that weekend. She had no connection to the couple. No one had entered or exited her house on Saturday night. Her neighbor had been watching it as a favor and had confirmed this. The couple had not gone into that house. They had walked up the path, and then they had simply not continued to exist in any form that left traces. Garrett went back over the ride in his memory. He went over it with the obsessive attention to detail that a frightened, practical person applies to an irrational situation. The man and woman had been real. He was certain of this. He had heard them, touched the seat they had sat in, handled the cardigan the woman had left. The cardigan was still on his passenger seat headrest. He had forgotten to file the lost and found report. He took the cardigan to the police. The detective sent it for evidence. A week later, Garrett received a call. The cardigan had come back from the lab. No DNA matching the woman in the photographs. No DNA from anyone. The cardigan had been handled. There were fibers. There were marks from use, but no biological material at all, which was, the lab technician had noted in the report, in a tone of careful professional neutrality, unusual. Unusual, Garrett said. Unusual, Detective Reyes confirmed. The investigation continued for several months. The couple was never found. Garrett was interviewed 3 more times, each time going over the same information, which did not change or expand regardless of how many angles the questions came from. He had driven them. They had disappeared. He did not know why. What he did know, and what he kept returning to with the dogged precision of a rational person trying to construct a logical framework from irrational material, was the sequence of details that he could not account for. The cardigan, with no DNA. The couple who had been missing since Friday, seen by him on Saturday. The house on the path where no one had gone in. The 50 feet. The 20 seconds. The gone. He went back to that street in Queen Anne on a Sunday afternoon, in daylight, with a level of deliberateness that he recognized as slightly obsessive. He stood on the sidewalk where he had pulled up. He walked the distance between where he had stopped and where he had watched the couple disappear. He measured it, 43 feet. He timed a walk of 43 feet, 10 seconds, at a normal pace. In 10 seconds, 2 people do not cease to exist. He stood at the end of the path and looked at the house. In the daylight, it was ordinary. Old, well-maintained, the garden dormant and covered in bark mulch. A bird feeder hanging from the porch. A doormat that said welcome. He stood there for a while. He did not feel anything particular. He just looked. What he has come to believe, over the years since the incident, is this. He did drive them. The records support it. His memory supports it. He drove a man and a woman who looked exactly like the couple in the photographs from a bar in Capitol Hill to a house in Queen Anne on a Saturday night. He believes this completely. What he also believes, without being entirely able to say why he believes it, is that the man and woman he drove were not the same as the man and woman in the photographs. Not in any simple way, not that he was mistaken about the resemblance, not that he was confused, but that there is a category of thing that looks exactly like a person and is present in all the ways a person is present and leaves evidence, in the ways a person leaves evidence, except for the biological ones. He cannot say what that category is. He does not have a name for it. He thinks about the woman's laugh when he made the weather comment. How real it sounded. How warm. How like a person who was simply happy to be out on a Saturday night with someone she loved. He thinks about that laugh in the way you think about something that is a kind of answer to a question you have not been able to ask yet. What were they? What had they come from? What were they doing? At a bar in Capitol Hill on a Saturday night, looking exactly like two people who had vanished the night before. He does not know. He has never driven for Uber again. He deactivated his account 3 weeks after the detective's final interview. He kept the fake succulent from the rearview mirror. It sits on his kitchen windowsill now. The case is technically still open. Detective Reyes was transferred to a different unit about 8 months after the investigation began, and a new detective took over who interviewed Garrett once and seemed considerably less interested in the unusual details than Reyes had been. Garrett has not been contacted in several months. He thinks about it regularly. Not obsessively, not in a way that prevents function. He still works, still runs 3 mornings a week, still tends his coffee setup with its small rituals. But the case sits in him the way certain unresolved things sit. Not painful exactly, but present, like a piece of gravel in a shoe that you have learned to walk around. Chester the cat, who was not present for any of this, seems indifferent to whatever psychological weight his owner is carrying. Chester is practical in his priorities. Garrett appreciates this about him. What bothers Garrett most when he examines it honestly is not the fear of what happened. He has made a kind of peace with the experience in the way you make peace with things that have no resolution. What bothers him is the woman's laugh, because it was a real laugh. He would stake anything on that, which means either something that is not human, laughed in a way that was indistinguishable from human warmth, or something human was there, in that car, fully present and real, and then was simply not. Both of these possibilities, as far as Garrett is concerned, are about equally disturbing. He has never found a third option. He told his friend Melanie about it once, over dinner, about 6 months after it happened. She listened with complete attention, the way good friends do. When he finished, she said, "Do you think they knew?" "What do you mean?" he said. "Do you think they knew what they were?" she said. "Or do you think they were just there, like present, without knowing they were something that shouldn't be?" Garrett has thought about this question more than any other aspect of the experience. He has sat with it in the morning over his coffee, and in the evening on his runs, and in the quiet of his apartment at night, when the coffee shop below is closed and the street outside is still. He does not have an answer. He is not sure which answer would be worse, and there they are. 5 stories, 5 drivers, 5 rides that went somewhere none of them expected. Dana, still nursing, still glancing at mirrors. Marcus, still driving, still carrying people carefully from where they are to where they need to be. Priya, no longer on the road, but watching reflections the way the rest of us watch for traffic. Tom, still making his decision every single day in the New Mexico desert light. And Garrett, still sitting with the question his friend Melanie asked him, whether something can be present in the world without knowing what it is. I want to say something to you. If you have stayed with me all the way to this moment, you are, by definition, someone who is comfortable with the dark. Not just the dark outside your window, but the dark at the edge of what can be explained. And I think that is a rare and valuable thing. The ability to sit with a question that does not resolve, to feel the discomfort of the unknown, and stay present inside it anyway is something that not everyone can do. But you can. You have done it tonight through 5 stories that had no clean endings and no comfortable answers. I want to hear from you. I genuinely do. Drop a comment below. Tell me which of these 5 stories stayed with you most and why. Was it Dana's Sarah, who knew things she could not have known? Marcus's man in the dark coat, who may have been something much older than he looked? Priya's reflection that would not match? Tom's passenger, who knew about the desert and the decision? Or Garrett's couple, who laughed and left nothing of themselves behind except a cardigan and a very rational person's inability to sleep? Tell me. I read every comment. I mean that. And if you are not subscribed yet, please consider hitting that button right now. We put out new stories regularly, and there is so much more where these came from. If you like tonight, the bell will make sure you never miss it when something new arrives. And if you know someone who loves this kind of thing, someone who appreciates the slow creep of a story that gets under your skin, share this video with them. There is nothing quite like watching scary stories with someone else who cannot look away. More is coming. I can promise you that. We are just getting started. Sleep well tonight, if you can. And if you cannot, if something in one of these stories has lodged itself somewhere behind your thoughts and is sitting there quietly, patient as anything, just remember, you are inside. The door is locked. The lights are as bright as you need them to be, and you are not, as far as you can tell, in anyone's back seat. Good night. Stay curious. Stay safe. And whatever you do the next time you call a car at 2 in the morning and a stranger pulls up and the door opens and the interior light comes on, take just 1 extra second to look at the mirror before you get in. Just 1 extra second. It probably does not matter. Probably. Good night, and sleep well.